Since the 1960s, we've changed things up in the church. Anyone old enough to remember the church before the 1960s? Before the 1960s, we didn't say Mass in English, we said Mass in Latin. Remember that? Et cum spiritu tuo. Before the 1960s, we used to celebrate the Mass with the priest not facing the people, but facing away from the people. And before the 1960s, we used to have the same readings every single year. We changed that up. In the 1960s, we no longer have the same readings every single year. Now we have them every how many years?
3 years.
Do you remember what was happening 3 years ago this weekend when we had these same readings? The Olympics, the Summer Olympics had just begun. We all know how the Summer Olympics are. What happens before the Olympics? For weeks in advance, we see people who are carrying the torch. And they hand off the light to another person, and that person runs and hands off the light to another person, and to another person, and to another person, until finally we get to the Olympic Stadium, and we light the Olympic fire. It's really cool, right? Think about this for a moment. For 2,000 years, we as Christians and Catholics have been passing the light of Christ like a torch. So we should see a show of hands. How many of us are old enough? How many of us remember our own baptism? A few of us?
I was old.
You were old? And the rest of you? Why don't you remember your baptism?
Babies. We're babies.
You were babies. Well, in the event that you don't remember your baptism, let me tell you what happened. At your baptism, there was a candle that looked like this. We call it the Paschal candle, which symbolizes what? The light of Christ. And your parents and godparents who received the light of Christ from their parents and godparents, who received the light of Christ from their parents and godparents, etc., tracing all the way back to the time of Christ, what happened? It was the time for them to share that torch, that light of Christ, with you. And so they lit your baptismal candle from that fire, and it was a symbol of them sharing that light with you. Shall we see another show of hands? Anyone here who's Don't tell me this is a signal, Lord. Another show of hands. How many of us have been parents or godparents for other people who've been baptized? Ooh, what a beautiful thing. Because the light of Christ that you received at your baptism, you now passed on to those you baptized. And what will happen? They'll pass that light on to others, who will pass it on to others, who will pass it on to others. In today's gospel, Jesus talks about setting the world on fire. Isn't that what we're doing? Every time we share the light with someone else, we're bringing more light into this world, and more light into this world, hopefully so that more and more are seeing the light of Christ. Does everyone want to see the light of Christ in this world? As we just saw, there are forces that work against the light of Christ. Amen? And no matter how many times we try to share the light of Christ with others, there are forces that try to extinguish that light. Right? That was obvious in today's first reading. Because Jeremiah got up and decided to allow God to speak through him. And did everyone want to hear it? Did everyone want to see the light? No. How symbolic that the place where they threw him was a place where there was no light. How did they decide to kill him? Not by nailing him to a cross. How did they try to kill Jeremiah? By throwing him into a cistern, a dark pit. They tried to extinguish the light by throwing it into a dark pit. The light will not be overcome. In today's second reading, the letter to the Hebrews talks about how it is that Christ endured the opposition of sinners too. People didn't just oppose Jeremiah and his light, they opposed Christ and his light as well. What does the second reading tell us? They killed him. Did that stop the light? No. What happened after 3 days? He rose again. And that light continues. That light will not be extinguished. In today's gospel, Jesus tells us, for those of us who are called to help set the world on fire, got news for you. There may be people who come at you because of that. Because of what you say and what you do, they're going to be against you. It may be your own family members, or friends, or co-workers, or neighbors. There are going to be people who work against the light. Does that mean that we should just extinguish it ourselves and go home? No. Our challenge is to continue to let that light shine. We receive that light of Christ from others, who received it from others, who received it from others, and others all the way back to Christ. Brothers and sisters, now it's up to us to carry that torch and to bring the light of Christ to this world.